Yeah, so to talk about my work, I think it was interesting to put in context what are the themes that interests me in order to understand what I'm doing. I can't go into too much detail on the theories and so on because I'm not a social scientist and it's not my intention to create theories about certain stuff. So I'm gonna go sadly superficially through certain stuff and then I'm gonna try to give example through my own artistic work. As Tommy said, I'm born and raised in Bogota in Colombia. I grew up there and I studied there first visual arts, and then I moved to Germany, to Munich, and I graduated on February last year, February 2023, I graduated from the media art class at the Art Academy here in Munich. And that particular moment is very important because in last February last year, I presented what I consider my very first work. Of course, many years before I did different stuff related to art. I also have a band, I have a musical practice and many other things. But before that, I felt that I was always producing maybe objects or producing certain experiences. But since February last year, I consider that I produced my very first idea or work, like a complete work that I feel. And for that, I need to talk about epistemic friction and decolonial methods for artistic production. The theories that kind of support my work are coming from the decolonial feminism, which is philosophical current of thought that proposes that colonialism, modernity, and capitalism are basically the same thing. So when colonialism started, let's say the colonialism of the American continent, of course there is like more processes of colonialism in Africa and so on. But when the colonial processes started in the American continent in the 15th century, started the power dynamics that we live today, still live today. So that is like the premise, and this is the proposal of these decolonial theorists. It is a theory, it is an idea, it's debatable. I think it's hard to debate, in my opinion, but it's debatable. But colonialism, they say, so the thinkers of this philosophical current or this philosophical thought, most of them are Latin American thinkers, Latin American philosophers, and they created a group of study that is called the decolonial turn. And they are constantly thinking and developing imaginaries on looking critically at colonialism and looking critically at how the power dynamics that we live today started there. So for the decolonial thinkers, colonialism is the beginning. Then it mutated to modernity. So modernity is like, yeah, you know, when industrialization processes happen in the world, especially in Europe and so on, and then mutated to capitalism. Why? Because capitalism has pretty much the same dynamics that colonialism is, like invading lands, extracting natural resources, using human capital or human force to work, slavery. So all of those things that started there still remain into a certain extent until the life that we live in today. So this is kind of the first premise of these philosophers. The next thing that is important for me to kind of explain, it's what it means, so epistemology. So epistemology, or the episteme, is knowledge of or understanding. When I talk about epistemology, I talk about knowledge. So philosophy is a kind of epistemology, or it's a way of knowledge, no? Epistemology is kind of the production of knowledge. Science is also a way of knowledge, but also ancient costumes from people are also knowledge. So humans and culture produces knowledge in many different forms, depending where they come. And these are like epistemes, or this is like different types of epistemology, just to put it like, not going too deep, but simple. So when you are a knower, or when you produce knowledge, you are a knower. Who produces knowledge? People in general produces knowledges. Scientists produce knowledge. Philosophers produce knowledge. Artists produce knowledge, you know? But then the question that also these decolonial thinkers ask is, who counts as a credible knower? Or who counts as a credible producer of knowledge? And that question is critical, because then we start to see that depending on what comes in that answer, who is credible or who matter the most, then we start to encounter epistemic hierarchies. It means that certain type of knowledge is more important than the other. Let's say, of course, we can put a simple example, like science is more important that, or is more credible, or is upper than maybe some other popular beliefs, let's say. That's one way of seeing like the epistemic hierarchies, yeah? From these epistemic hierarchies in which it's decided that certain type of knowledge is more important than the other, then we start to see the epistemic oppressions or the epistemic injustices. One example that can graphic this really well is, for example, the knowledge or the philosophy produced by women. Like there's plenty of women philosophers. But where is this knowledge, and why is not so extant, or why is not so present? Because the knowledge produced by men, white men, Western men, are taking all the space, basically. And then we suffer, women in general, and women philosophers, writers, and so on, they suffer for epistemic injustice. Why? Because they don't have the same spaces to speak. They don't have the same exposure and the same broadcasting of this knowledge. Yeah? It could also happen with indigenous philosophy, or even black philosophy. I mean, whatever you want to call it, in the sense of, we go back to this, who counts as a credible knower and why there are knowers that are more important than others. With this, in this system of the epistemic hierarchies, injustice, oppressions, and so on, there is one term that is the one that I'm more interested to work in to tackle in my work, and is the friction. Epistemic friction for me is, as friction, the name says, it's some sort of this, no? It's like rubbering against each other. And then when I talk about epistemic friction, I'm talking about two types of knowledge, or two universes of knowledge kind of rubbing against each other to see what happens. In that sense, I'm going to start to talk about the first work that I did. When colonialism started, different power structures developed. So the Europeans that came to invade the American continent, they had the power over the population. And the power and the way they gained the trust was through lies, violence, displacement, killing. Well, we all know the story of colonialism, no? And this power structure ended up in this kind of a pyramid, in which the white European man, or the one westernized man, is the one that has the power. That's how basically it works. So for my first work, which is like my final work I did at the academy, my diploma work, I developed a site-specific installation at the Historische Aula. This is the Historische Aula. I don't know if, I guess few of you guys had visited the Historische Aula, the Art Academy here in Munich. It is this huge space, and it has in the walls these tapestries. They are called gobelins. They were a gift of the King Max I. He gave this gift in 1815, so in the 19th century. And these gobelins were produced in 1730, something like that, in France. And they are copies of the Raphael frescoes. So there is like, this is one of the spaces. And then in the opposite side of the aula, there is the School of Athens, this very famous fresco from Raphael. And this is the space at the Art Academy here in Munich where conferences, master classes, so different activities of the academy happen there. What I wanted to do with these goblins was to create some epistemic friction. Why? Because these things, they are basically monuments. They cannot be moved. So they are there. They're like 12 meters per, I don't know, 12 meters per 5 meters. They're like huge, huge tapestries on the wall. And they are basically impossible to move. So they are like huge monuments on the walls of the Art Academy. What are these images represent for me? These images represent a canon, like a Western canon of knowledge, of beauty, of society, in a way. And these are representing the Western values of knowledge, which is like the school in Athens and philosophy. But which knowledge? The Western white knowledge. It's what it is, it's fine. But it's like, it's incomplete. So the Western canons of knowledge, beauty, and so on are not universal. And that's one of the problems of epistemic hierarchies, of epistemic oppression and epistemic injustice, and is that the dominant epistemology is always believing that is universal and that applies to all. That's not the case. That's not the case for indigenous people, that's not the case for black people, that's not the case for many different minorities, different types of society, different types of nationalities. The Western white canon is not universal. And that is something that is really hard to understand for white people. Because there is like a noble intent, no? There is like some sort of noble intention of, you know, glorified thought and so on. But who are these guys? They are two guys representing what it is, the ultimate value or the ultimate notion of knowledge. So I wanted to create a friction and say, this is not complete. This theory of knowledge or these canons are not complete, and it should be, and there should be a friction. There should be a friction of knowledge, and there should be a dialogue between different type of aesthetics. So my work was an installation in this room in which I created, these are like sound devices inspired in the sound systems of Colombia. Sound systems, there is a huge sound system culture in the northern coast of Colombia that creates these devices that are called picos. And they are sound systems that are taken to the streets, and they're made for parties, and they're made for gathering and different stuff. Also, it's very inspired by the Jamaican sound system. You've seen these kind of huge towers of huge speakers. So in Colombia, it's kind of a similar vibe, similar culture. And then I created these elements with a sound installation that will reproduce decolonial feminist theories talking about why the knowledge coming from the white men is not universal. That's basically one of the things. As you can see there at the back, there is like a stage because I also created a performance. And then the performance is the thing that actually shows more graphically what I mean with this kind of a understanding that things should be like this, or things are exclusively like this, or universally like this. This is how it looks, the tapestries at the back, and then the sound devices on front, throwing these sounds and this sound composition, because I wanted to have like, there up there, the Western or kind of the white canon, and down there, something colorful, making some sort of contrast, yeah, against this, that it feels so established that nobody questions. But it's a monument exalting that. And I also was inspired by the 2020, that was like a huge rage of people toppling monuments around the world. I think they topple Christopher Columbus, and they topple this other Belgian king, this laborist. There was like a huge movement on many different places of the world, people just toppling down the monuments and the statues of these prominent people, because this is history. Monuments are a narrative of history. And who tells the history, or who is the protagonist of history? In the Western world, the protagonist of history is usually a white man. Again, yes, they do good things, but it's incomplete. So I was very inspired by an action from a community in Colombia that toppled one of the Spanish conquerors in a sacred summit that was like a sacred mountain that they had where they do rituals and connect with different aspects of their cosmology and territory. And when the Spanish came, they put like a guy on top of a horse, like on the sacred summit. And they decided to topple down because they made a trial. And in this symbolic trial, they found him, which is Sebastián de Belalcázar, they found him guilty. So they did this symbolical trial, the whole community, and they said, okay, Sebastián de Belalcázar is guilty of genocide, rape, displacement, and he doesn't deserve that place in history. He doesn't deserve to be exalted because for us, the community that owns this sacred mountain, this person is just like a violent agent that doesn't represent our history. And so they top down. So my intent, as I cannot rip the tapestries and put it down, my intent was to some sort of toppling down these monuments on this way. Toppling down these monuments, creating this experience, this sound and aesthetical experience, and also creating a performance. So for that, I invited 2 drag queens, which are like really prominent figures in the Munich scene, actually. Barbecue and Janisha Jones. Barbecue, she's from Bolivia, actually. Nico, when she is him, Nicolás is from Bolivia, is a super, super good friend, and Janisha is from Spain. And they both did the performance that I want to show you. I'm going to just show like a few minutes of it and of what we did. So we are here at the Historische Aula. Maybe you can turn the sound, Tommy. Thank you.
Is it still connected?
Yeah, should be. So this is the Historische Aula that I show you in the pictures, and this is my band. Actually, we made sound performances, and we invite them, Janisha and Barbecue. We did like an ambient piece for this performance. We were creating the music live. And my idea was to put on the spot these places that are supposed to be the norm, but that are not complete. They just tell one part of the story. They just tell the part that has to do with power, you know? So what they did is like they're dressing blue and red as Plato and Aristotle, and they are kind of mimicking this, you know, wise posture of the wise man that knows it all. So they would take the spotlight and they will just take one figure of one of the tapestries, and they would create this imitation, no? And then I would be like kind of ambienting the whole situation with some live music. And all of this, of course, has like some sort of ritualistic vibe, no? Like kind of putting some mysticism, energy, and so on into the whole act. So one of them is like showing with the spotlight the poses, and then the other one is kind of imitating. For me, it was a way to radicalize, in a way, how serious the white man takes his own knowledge through an aesthetic that can make some friction. What is this aesthetic? It's a queer aesthetic. You know, the aesthetic of the drag queens. You know, it's a kind of aggressive aesthetic sometimes for many. So yeah, in this performance, there is like many theories that talk about performance, but in general, performance is a way to update history. That's something that I like about performance, is like with certain actions, you can kind of update things or update knowledge and update history in general. So what I'm doing here is kind of completing, or is that my aim, kind of to complete a little bit this history of knowledge through making friction with some other aesthetics, some other ways of knowledge, and some other ways of exist, some other bodies, not only the white bodies, but also queer bodies. And that's basically it. I mean, after that, we make a concert with the band, but this is basically the concept of putting on the spotlight and mimicking, recreating the poses. Then we play a concert with my band. I have a band that plays cumbia. It's a genre from Colombia, and we mix it with the disco and with electronic vibes and sounds, blah blah blah. But that's another story for another for another moment. So yeah, that's basically what I believe is epistemic friction. And I did the same, I also created this kind of there's the posters are there, these kind of posters or statements, which in my opinion, of course, are a little bit provocative, and of course can be debatable, and I'm not wanting to make, as I said, philosophy or social sciences. I'm trying to transmit ideas through different sensibilities, which is art. Art is a different way to communicate. For me, art is a way of communication. It doesn't have to be for everyone, and it doesn't have to be always like that. But for me, it's a way of communicate ideas through a different type of sensibility. And then, okay, that's it. So I will talk shortly about the other project in which I tried to do the same, which is the project that Tommy was at the Instituto Cervantes. This project is also a site-specific. I think site-specific projects, the ones that deal with the space, are like really interesting because they are contextual. They situate your work in which you work with the space you are. It's not only about displaying your own objects, which is fine too, but then I'm really interested to develop this kind of interaction between the space and the work. For this, I work with several indigenous friends that send me testimonials in like a recording on WhatsApp, saying how was for them to go through colonization process about language, how was for them to learn Spanish, or how that affect their communities and their grandmas or grandmas of the grandmas of the grandmas, and how was for them all of this and how they relate to their own native language. So I work with also with another friend, which is a researcher, and he works with different indigenous communities in Colombia. And I was in very close contact with many of them talking about this problematic. Why? Because the project was presented at the Instituto Cervantes in Munich, which is the Spanish school. And Spanish was a super violent colonization device. So when they taught Spanish to the natives, of course they went through very radical, hardcore violences. So if you don't speak Spanish, you are going to be punished. Or if you speak your language, you're going to be punished. So all of this process of colonization through language happened at that time. And then I talked with these indigenous to kind of get their own perspective on what it means, what it meant for them, and what it means for them to speak their own language. Indigenous language are active. Not all of them, but many of them are still there are millions of people speaking indigenous languages still, and for me that's a way of resistance. That's a way of epistemic resistance, yeah? Which is like resisting with your own knowledge against the oppression and against the violence that wants to be imposed by other types of knowledges, yeah? I work with many people in this project, as you can see, many indigenous voices, and also like different aspects of the work were work by different people. So these devices were placed on the space in the Instituto Cervantes, and they were transmitting the indigenous languages all the time, and they were transmitting these testimonials. I created like a sound piece, and I also put these flags outside the Instituto Cervantes, which is this building that was given by some king to another king. Well, very colonial, very colonial stuff. And then I was researching about different indigenous languages, and then I placed these flags in Carijona, which is a language from the Amazon, with some slogans in Carijona and slogans in Spanish to try to make some, again, resistance, epistemic friction. It's all the same. For me, it's like, I always come back to that, no? To this resistance, to this friction. So these were these devices, and they are constantly speaking in Carijona. There was also like a super nice graphic design by Guadalupe. She's there. She's the one that did all that. And then all of these textiles, which I wanted to kind of invade the space at the Cervantes, which is like the reception, for the people and the visitors to kind of notice a difference, because the Instituto Cervantes is not an exhibition space necessarily, like a proper one. It's a language school. So working with these spaces that are not properly made for exhibitions was a little bit tricky, I think. But then we kind of created like a different environment, and the people could scan like a code and get access to the page of Lenguas Solares, in which I explain all the context, and also you can listen to the you can listen to all of the testimonials of all the indigenous friends, also translated to Spanish, unfortunately only to Spanish. They talk in the indigenous languages and they translate themselves. And it's beautiful what they feel about their own language, because for them it's not only a tool of communication, it's a tool to connect with the territory, it's a tool to connect with the cosmos, it's a tool to connect with their own beliefs, it's a tool for connection in general. So it's not only to speak with other people, it's actually to kind of spread a way of connecting with their beliefs, with their territory specifically. So languages for them are sacred. So that's why when Spanish came to impose, also through evangelization, which is also like the second process of colonial violence, it was like you teach Spanish or you learn the languages to teach the word of God, to teach Christianism, to teach the values of Catholicism, which again are in the top of the hierarchy of the epistemology, no? Christian values are more important than other beliefs, pagan, indigenous values. Yeah. So, again, another type of violence. So yeah, I'm gonna finish shortly, Tommy, but I need to really, I know I extended a tiny bit, but I think it's important because there are complex topics. You can ask me something if you eventually, when we finish. But all of that to finish with why it's important to develop decolonial methods to make artistic practices that go in that direction. So just to summarize, these methods and these things, of course, not all of that I'm talking comes from me. This is coming from a research of many different thinkers, from decolonial feminists, from, well, you name it, I mean, many different books and stuff. But then I summarize what I think are good methods to guarantee an ethical approach to creation. Yeah, because I'm a Colombian, and of course I am an intersection of many different things. I'm a woman, I'm an immigrant, I'm queer. Of course that put me in a lot of intersection, but I'm also privileged. And I also think that I'm privileged compared to other people. Like the fact that I can live here, that I can have certain economical stability, that I can speak my mind, you know, that I'm not so dark in my skin. All of that is like a privilege inside an intersection of oppressions that I'm living. And I cannot just take, for example, the fights and the intentions of these communities as my own, because they're not. I feel that I'm an agent that can help to create this friction, but I cannot appropriate from that fights. So that's why it's important for me to also be ethical in the way I work and in the way I speak of minorities. And these are the methods that I consider are good and are good guidelines to create in a more sustainable and conscious way. Work collaboratively, which is like involve more people in your practice. Practice active listening, which is like listen to the people you're working with, listen to the communities, listen to what they have to say for real. Find intersections, which is like what is in common between me and an indigenous person in Colombia, or between me and a queer person here in Germany. Like these intersections are important to create. take care of the other, which is like take care of the other, you know, pay them. I don't know, you know, all of these things that has to do with taking care of the other. Fight insensitivity. And that is important because we are so used to social media content all the time that in some point we become numb and we become insensitive to a lot of epistemic injustices happening all the time. Start improbable dialogues. That is important because it's about putting kind of a contrary ideas to talk. It is important. It is important to put contrary ideas or contrasting ideas to talk. And these are sometimes improbable values in a society like this that is so polarized. Self-reflection and self-autocorrection. I think it's important to always recognize the mistakes. And that is something that the white man usually doesn't know how to do properly, which is like recognizing all of the mistakes. We can call colonialism is more than a mistake. It's a terrible violence thing. But it's really important to recognize how your ancestors had created the power dynamics that we live in, and how through self-reflection and self-autocorrection you can have a better way to deal with the different people around you or with the different people of the world. We live in a global context. We don't only live in this Munich city, in this bubble of beautiful people, nice things. No, it's not like that. Create concepts that seek for reparation, attention, and construction of memory. That for me is important that these indigenous people were sounding in the Instituto Cervantes, because that creates memory, because that creates friction against people that don't even know that this exists, actually. Maybe not people related with the art world or something that, you know, but many people didn't know that there are millions of people talking indigenous languages still resisting to an oppressive system. And lastly, your vision and aesthetic decision as an artist cannot prevail over the fights and resistances of communities that you work with. So that's really important, that it's not about you. When I'm talking about me, actually, but it's not about me or it's not about you. It's about maybe something bigger. If you work with communities and if you want to exalt values or if you want to protect minorities and so on, it's about something else. So you have to leave the ego behind and try to work in a different way. And that's it. Thank you so much. Sorry for extending too long.